200 wedding invitations with my farm's address. 200. And I only found out from the florist who called to coordinate the decorations. Imagine the humiliation. My own son David and his fiancée Jessica had planned their wedding on my property without even asking if it was okay. As if I were invisible. As if my farm were theirs. But that day, as I listened to the florist talk about red roses and ceremony arches, something inside me snapped. I worked for 40 years to buy that land. 40 years as a housekeeper, cleaning other people's homes, enduring humiliations, saving every single penny, and now my own son was treating it as if it were his. I hung up the phone with trembling hands and immediately called the biggest event company in the city. "Are you available on Saturday?" I asked with a smile they couldn't see. "Perfect." I wanted to rent my farm for an important corporate event. If they wanted to use my property, they were going to find out it had an owner. For 40 years, I got up at 5 in the morning. 40 years cleaning floors that weren't mine, washing other people's clothes, ironing shirts for men who didn't even greet me when I arrived at their homes. 40 years putting up with disrespect from bosses who treated me worse than their dogs. All for a dream that seemed impossible. To have my own place in the world. My 74-acre farm on the outskirts of town, with its white-painted farmhouse, its mango and avocado trees, and that wide porch where I planned to spend my golden years drinking coffee in peace. When I finally bought it at 65 years old, I cried like a child. Every brick, every tree, every square foot of blessed earth was mine. I held the deed in my trembling hands. My name was right there, Hilda Morales, sole owner. But for David and Jessica, from day one, it was our family property. They never helped pay a dime for maintenance or offered to fix a broken fence, but they showed up every weekend with friends without warning, leaving empty bottles and expecting me to clean up like their personal maid. "Mom, could you make something to eat?" More guests showed up than we expected, Jessica would say with that fake smile while flopping onto my new hammock. And I, like a fool in love with my children, always obeyed. That Tuesday morning, when the florist called, I felt as if I had been doused with ice water. Throughout the week, the calls kept coming, the caterer, the DJ, the photographer. Everyone had my address. Anger grew like fire in my veins. On Wednesday afternoon, I confronted David. "What does my wedding have to do with you?" he asked with a coldness that froze my blood. When I told him the vendors were calling, his response shattered me. "Oh, Mom, I forgot to mention it to you, but don't worry. It's not going to cost you anything. We just need you to have the house ready and prepare some food for the family." 200 guests, David, I whispered. "Mom, don't exaggerate. It'll be like 150 people max. Look on the bright side. You'll get to meet Jessica's family." The bright side. As if it were a privilege for strangers to trample my lawn. I hung up the phone. The tears running down my cheeks weren't from sadness. They were from an anger so profound it burned like volcanic lava. By Thursday, I had signed a contract with Henry Smith of Premium Corporate Events. $5,000 for 1 day's rental. $5,000 that my son had never offered for upkeep, but which a private company paid without batting an eye. Friday morning, Jessica called in a panic. "The florist says he can't get in tomorrow. He says someone else rented the place." "Exactly, Jessica. It's my farm. You're finally understanding." When they arrived an hour later, David was purple with rage. "Cancel that corporate event," he yelled. "We sent out 200 invitations. You should have consulted me before sending out invitations with my address on them." I replied, "This is my property, David, not yours. I decide what happens here." They tried everything. Threats, begging, and finally, the lowest card of all. "If you ruin our special day, you'll never see your grandchildren again." But even that didn't scare me anymore. On Saturday morning, I took the longest bath of my life. I put on my most elegant wine-colored dress and my mother's pearl earrings. I was no longer the humiliated housekeeper. I was Hilda Morales. As the wedding vendors and guests began to arrive at 10 a.m., they were met with private corporate event signs. I sat on my porch, drinking coffee, watching the confusion unfold. When guests asked where the wedding was, I told them courteously, "I'm afraid it can't be held here today. You'll have to talk to the bride and groom. I'm just the owner of the place." The CEO of the corporate group shook my hand with genuine admiration. "Mrs. Morales, thank you so much for allowing us to use your beautiful property," he said, treating me with the respect and courtesy that a successful businesswoman deserves. While the executives enjoyed their elegant meeting in my perfectly decorated garden, I sat on my porch. I was awaiting the moment I had been imagining all week, the moment David and Jessica would arrive in their wedding attire and realize they could no longer dispose of my life as they pleased. At 2:30 in the afternoon, just as the corporate presentation began, a caravan of white cars decorated with silver ribbons appeared on the dirt road. My heart sped up like a war drum. It was the wedding party. David stepped out of the lead car in a black tuxedo, his face a mask of panic that contrasted sharply with his formal attire. Jessica followed, looking beautiful in ivory, though her beauty vanished the moment she saw the reality of my garden. 50 elegantly dressed executives occupied the tables she had dreamed of. A corporate slideshow played on the giant screen where the altar should have been. "This can't be happening," Jessica screamed. "This is our day." David ran toward the porch, his tuxedo tails flying.
Mom.
"Get out here. You have to kick these people out right now." I got up slowly from my rocking chair, smoothing my wine-colored dress. "Good afternoon, David. You look very elegant." "This is no time for jokes," he yelled. "There are 100 guests waiting. Jessica's family traveled from out of town." "What a shame," I replied calmly. "You should have thought of that before using my property, without my consent." The desperation set in quickly. Jessica offered me $10,000, then $20,000, money that appeared magically only when they needed me to save them. But the problem wasn't the money. It was the contract I had signed and the word I had given to the professionals in my garden. "We're your family," David exploded. "We should be your priority." "Family," I repeated with a smile. "The same family that has used my farm as a personal backyard for 5 years? The family that never asked if I agreed with their plans?" Father Thomas, the priest, eventually arrived to mediate. He listened as I explained 40 years of cleaning other people's homes to buy this farm, only to be treated like a housekeeper in my own house by my own son. He didn't judge me. He understood the moral dilemma. How to find the balance between love and respect. Desperation eventually turned to a hollow humility. David promised monthly rent, maintenance coverage, and a seat at the table as the queen of the house. I knew these promises were born of a crisis and would likely fade once the honeymoon was over. So, I formed a plan, one that would ensure the lesson stuck. I approached Henry, the corporate event planner. With a 50% discount incentive, his clients agreed to wrap up by 4:30 p.m. I turned back to my son and his bride. "The ceremony will be held here after 4:30, I announced. "But under my conditions." "Anything, Mom," David said nervously. "First, any future event must be consulted a month in advance. Second, you will pay the $1,000 a month rent we discussed. Third, I will be publicly recognized as the hostess of this property today." I paused, watching their faces. "And fourth, during the toast, I am going to explain exactly how we got to this situation. I will tell everyone how 200 invitations were sent out without the owner's knowledge, and how this wedding was almost canceled because no one thought it was necessary to ask me for permission." The look of absolute horror on their faces was almost comical. "Mom, you can't," David whispered. "Everyone will think we're disrespectful." "And weren't you?" I asked with devastating simplicity. "Weren't you disrespectful by using my property without my consent?" Standing there in the eye of the hurricane, I felt more powerful and in control of my destiny than I had in all my 70 years. The wedding would happen, but for the first time, everyone would know exactly whose roof they were standing under. "I understand your point, but public humiliation can permanently damage family relationships." "Father, with all due respect," I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. "Disrespect towards parents also permanently damages family relationships. The difference is that my humiliation has been private for years, while theirs would be public for minutes." It was an unassailable logic, and Father Thomas knew it. He nodded slowly, acknowledging that I had a valid point. "What if we accept all your conditions?" Jessica asked, her voice breaking. Including the public toast. Including the public toast. Jessica and David looked at each other with that silent communication that couples have when they face difficult decisions. I could see them calculating mentally. It was better to have a wedding with public humiliation or to have no wedding at all. Is there no way to negotiate the toast part? David asked desperately. We could do everything else. Pay the rent, always consult you, recognize you as the hostess, but avoid the public speech. No, I replied with a firmness that surprised me. You either accept all my conditions, or you can find another place for your ceremony. It was the moment of truth. The moment they had to decide if their pride was more important than their wedding. The moment they had to choose between temporary humiliation and the complete loss of their special day. Jessica was the first to break. Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. We accept all your conditions, all of them, including the toast. David looked at her in surprise, then looked at me, and finally he also nodded. Okay, Mom, we accept. At that moment, I felt something I had never felt in my life. Absolute power mixed with poetic justice. It wasn't cruel revenge. It wasn't gratuitous malice. It was simply the natural consequences of their own decisions presented in a way that everyone could learn the lesson. Perfect, I told them with a smile that came from the depths of my satisfaction. Henry, please proceed to talk to your clients about speeding up the event. Father Thomas, we'll need to reorganize the ceremony for 5 in the afternoon. David, go inform all the guests that the wedding will take place, but with a modified schedule. The machinery of organization was immediately put into motion. Henry ran to talk to the executives, who received the news with professional enthusiasm and personal curiosity. Father Thomas began to calculate times for the modified ceremony. The guests began to receive the information that there would be a wedding just later than planned. And I sat on my porch watching as my farm became the setting for a wedding that would finally take place on my terms with my rules, and with the public recognition that this property had a name and a last name, Hilda Morales. But the best part was yet to come. The part where all the guests would know the complete story of how a 70-year-old grandmother taught her son and daughter-in-law that respect is not negotiable, that consideration is not optional, and that mothers also have dignity. The best part was the toast I was mentally preparing, the speech that would be remembered for decades in all future family gatherings. At 5:30 in the afternoon, my farm was transformed into something I had never imagined. The executives had kept their word and finished their event on time, but most of them had stayed as special guests, fascinated by the idea of witnessing a family wedding after their business meeting. It was like having 2 events in one, and the mix of corporate elegance with family drama created a unique atmosphere. Jessica looked beautiful despite all the stress of the day. Her wedding dress, although a little dirty from her desperate running, was still spectacular under the golden light of the sunset. David had managed to fix his hair and straighten his tie, regaining some of the elegance a groom is supposed to have on his big day. The 200 guests were finally seated, although in a completely different configuration than originally planned. The corporate chairs were mixed with the wedding chairs, creating an improvised but functional arrangement. The altar was set up under my favorite mango tree, the same tree I had planted with my own hands 3 years ago. Father Thomas, with that adaptability that priests develop after decades of unexpected ceremonies, had managed to create a solemn and beautiful atmosphere despite the extraordinary circumstances. His voice resonated clear and strong as he read the marriage vows that would unite my son and daughter-in-law for a lifetime. But while I listened to the promises of eternal love, I was focused on the moment that would come after the toast. The moment when the whole family, all the friends, all the guests would know the complete story of how we had gotten here. When Father Thomas pronounced the final words, "You may kiss as husband and wife," the applause was deafening. 200 people celebrating triumphant love. Corporate executives mingling with emotional family members. An explosion of joy that filled my garden with a wonderful energy. Henry then approached with a glass of champagne in his hand and a wireless microphone. "Mrs. Morales, it's time for your toast as hostess." My heart began to beat faster. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment of absolute truth. I slowly got up, took the microphone with hands that no longer trembled, and walked to the center, where everyone could see me perfectly. The silence gradually spread until 200 people were looking at me with expectation, waiting for the emotional words that the groom's mother typically says in these moments. "Good evening, everyone." I began with a voice that sounded stronger and more confident than it had ever sounded. "I'm Hilda Morales, David's mother and the owner of this beautiful farm where we are celebrating today." The applause was immediate and warm. So far, everything sounded completely normal. "I want to thank you all for joining us on this very special day, although I must confess that I found out there would be a wedding here in the exact same way you did, by invitation." A murmur of confusion began to spread among the guests. Some people looked at each other, without completely understanding what I had said. "You see, my son and my daughter-in-law sent out 200 invitations with my farm's address without consulting me if I agreed to have a wedding here." The murmur turned into an absolute silence. All eyes alternated between the bride and groom, who had faces red with shame, and me, who continued to speak with unshakable serenity. I found out on Tuesday morning when the florist called to coordinate the decorations. Imagine my surprise to discover that my property had been committed for an event I didn't know existed. The corporate executives who had witnessed all the afternoon's drama began to smile with admiration. They recognized a businesswoman defending her rights. For 40 years, I worked as a housekeeper to buy this farm. 40 years cleaning other people's houses, saving penny after penny, dreaming of having a place of my own where I could live with dignity in my golden years. My voice cracked slightly, but I continued, and for the 5 years I have lived here, I have been treated as a housekeeper on my own property. The silence was so profound, you could hear the wind moving the leaves on the trees. No one expected this kind of speech at a wedding, but everyone was completely captivated by the story unfolding in front of their eyes. When I found out what had happened, I made a decision. I rented my farm for a corporate event on the same day as the wedding to teach my son and daughter-in-law that this property has an owner, and that owner is me. Several guests began to nod in approval. The story was starting to make sense to everyone. But at the end of the day, family love is stronger than hurt pride. And although it was necessary to go to this extreme to get the respect I deserve, here we are celebrating David and Jessica's love in my house on my terms with my rules. The applause that followed was different from the previous one. It was an applause of admiration, of recognition, of genuine respect for a woman who had defended her dignity. So, I toasted the bride and groom who today learned that respect for parents is not optional, that consideration for others is fundamental, and that mothers also have rights and feelings. I raised my champagne glass, and the whole crowd did the same. To David and Jessica, may they begin their marriage by understanding the value of mutual respect. The applause that followed was thunderous. 200 people celebrating not only a wedding, but a life lesson masterfully imparted. The corporate executives applauded with professional admiration. The older family members nodded in approval. Even the young friends seemed to understand that they had witnessed something extraordinary. David then approached with tears in his eyes and hugged me in front of the whole crowd. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered in my ear. "Sorry it took us so long to understand." Jessica came after, her wedding dress dirty and her tears of shame mixed with tears of gratitude. "Thank you for saving the wedding despite everything, Hilda. We will never forget this lesson." The rest of the celebration was magical. The guests constantly came up to congratulate me, not only on my son's wedding, but on the way I had handled the situation. "What a brave woman," Melissa's Italian grandmother said to me. "I wish more mothers had your character," David's uncle commented. The corporate executives integrated perfectly into the family party, exchanging business cards and talking about future events on my farm. Henry sought me out before he left. "Mrs. Morales, after what I witnessed today, I want to offer you an exclusive contract. Your farm and your personality are exactly what our most demanding clients are looking for." When everyone was gone and I was left alone, cleaning up the last details, I sat on my porch and looked at the stars beginning to appear in the night sky. In my hands, I held two things I hadn't had when I woke up that morning: a contract to turn my farm into a prosperous business, and the absolute respect of my family. But the most important thing I had was something that could not be touched or measured. The certainty that I would never again allow anyone, not even my own son, to treat me as less than I am. The certainty that Hilda Morales was not just the self-sacrificing mother, not just the complacent grandmother, not just the family's housekeeper. Hilda Morales was the owner of her own destiny, the lady of her own house, the author of her own story. And that story had just begun the most beautiful chapter of all. The chapter where I finally respected myself enough to demand that others respect me too. At 70 years old, I had learned the most important lesson of my life, that love without respect is not true love, and that teaching respect, even if it is painful, is the greatest gift a mother can give her children. 6 months have passed since the most talked about wedding in town, and my life has changed in ways I never imagined. Every morning, I wake up on my farm with a feeling I didn't know before, the feeling of being completely in control of my own existence. The events business has flourished beyond my wildest dreams. Henry kept his promise, and my farm has become the most exclusive place in the region for elegant weddings and corporate meetings. Every weekend I receive between $3,000 and $5,000 for renting my property. Money that has given me a financial independence I never had, not even when I was working double shifts as a housekeeper. But the most beautiful thing is not the money. The most beautiful thing is the respect. David and Jessica have religiously kept their promise. Every month they deposit the $1,000 in rent on time, and they have never, not once, shown up without consulting me first. When they want to use the farm for a family celebration, they call me weeks in advance, politely ask if the date is available and wait for my answer, without taking anything for granted. The first time they did it 4 months ago, I almost cried with emotion. David called me one Thursday afternoon. "Mom, could you check your calendar? We want to celebrate Jessica's birthday at the farm next Saturday, if that's okay with you. And if you don't have other plans, if that's okay with you." Words I had waited 5 years to hear. But the most profound change has been in the way they treat me when they are here. I am no longer the housekeeper who prepares food and cleans up after parties. Now, I am the respected hostess, the owner of the house, who sits at the head of the table while they take care of serving and cleaning. The first time Jessica insisted on washing the dishes after a family dinner, I was so surprised I didn't know what to do. "Hilda, you worked enough preparing this delicious meal. We'll take care of the cleanup." It was like living in a parallel world where I was finally treated as the matriarch I always should have been. The grandchildren, of course, still come to visit me. Jessica never carried out her threat to keep them away from me. And now I understand why. The children need their grandmother as much as I need them. But even the relationship with them has improved because now they see me as the powerful grandmother who demanded respect, not as the submissive grandmother who always gave in to everything. The whole town knows my story. For months, I was the topic of conversation at the market, at church, everywhere. Some women would seek me out to tell me their own stories of family disrespect. "Hilda, how did you find the courage to stand up for yourself?" Irene would ask me every time we met. My answer is always the same. I didn't find the courage. I built it day by day, every time I decided I deserved something better. And it's true. It wasn't a moment of sudden bravery. It was years of accumulated humiliations until I finally said enough. I have received 3 marriage proposals from widowers in town who were impressed with my strong character and financial independence. I politely thanked them but explained that at 70 years old, I finally learned to be happy with myself, and I wouldn't trade that happiness for anything. My farm has become a symbol in town. Young women come to see me to ask for advice on how to set boundaries with their families. Older mothers tell me how they used my story to teach their adult children respect. Even Father Thomas mentions my case in his sermons about the honor we owe our parents. Henry's corporate event business has become a prosperous partnership. I now have events scheduled until the end of the year, and the waiting list to rent my farm is 3 months long. Major companies, wealthy families, even regional celebrities have discovered this little paradise I built with 40 years of sweat and tears. But every night when the guests leave and the lights go out, I sit on my porch with a cup of coffee and look at the stars with a satisfaction I didn't know before. It's not just the satisfaction of money earned or respect conquered. It's the profound satisfaction of knowing that I am finally who I always should have been. I am no longer Hilda, the housekeeper. I am no longer Hilda, the self-sacrificing mother who suffers in silence. I am no longer Hilda, the compliant grandmother who accepts anything to avoid conflict. Now I am Hilda Morales, a successful businesswoman, a respected matriarch, a woman who stood up for herself when it seemed too late to change things. Hilda, who taught her children that true love includes respect, and that respect is not begged for, it is demanded. And every night before I fall asleep, I whisper a small prayer of thanks. Not for the wedding that almost got canceled, not for the conflict that almost destroyed the family, but for having had the courage at 70 years old to write the end of my own story, instead of letting others write it for me. Because it is never too late to start respecting yourself. And it is never too late to teach others how they should treat us.